I have a situation here where I have employees that can change what team they're on. And in this case, in the simple version, the people are nice enough to say what their team was at the start of the year, and then in case they changed, they will then say what the year and month was when they changed. So for person B here, who hasn't changed team, he just has one row. But for everyone else, they have the first row, and then they have a row where they changed. And I want to have a table where I have each year month for the current year, and then the team. So I want to fill down and say that in 2023-02, person A was on team A, and in 03 they were also on team A. But then in 06 they were in B, which means I want to do the Cartesian product between ID and year month, which is exactly what I'm going to do. First, I just want to grab all the unique values from the ID, and then after I'll also create all the unique values for year month, which is simply to say remove duplicates. But I don't just want to remove duplicates, I want to create the distinct IDs, so I also need to remove the other columns. And then I want this to be one query step so that I don't have clutter over here. So I can just take the code and then apply that. So then I can take this code, and then instead of having the remove duplicates in here, I can just replace the code. So I'll say this is what I want to do, but then the table here is not remove duplicates, that is the code that gives me the remove duplicates. So like this, and then I have that. So it's two steps in one, but it's fine because it's pretty apparent what I'm doing. That would be distinct ID. And then I also need to create a list that goes from 2023-01, and then I'm in the 9th month, so I need this to go until 2023-09, which I can do by making a list. And because I know I'm in the current year, and I know it starts at 01, I have my start point, and I know my end point needs to be based on the today. I need to create a list, but I'm going to start just to visualize what I want to do by grabbing the minimum value, which is to grab the date year portion of date time local now, which will then give me 2023 in this case. And then a little trick is that I can then multiply this value by 100, which effectively just creates exactly what I have here, because I know month can be 01 or it can be 12, so it will be 2 digits. So if I multiply this by 100, I get 2023-00, and then I want to add 1. And then the benefit is I also get that second position for free, basically. So this is my minimum, which I'm just going to copy, and then I need the maximum, which is also the date year from today. But then instead of adding 1, I need to add the month portion from today's date, which is in this. And then I need to create a list, which I simply do by starting out with the curly bracket and adding that back in. And I need that at the end as well. And then to say I want to create a list, I just need 2 full stops, and it will say generate all the values between these two. And apparently Power Query is smart enough to know that that means this is my minimum, this is my max, add 1. And then I'm just going to copy that and say I want to convert this into a table so I can do a join a bit more easily. And that is all fine. And then I just want to say that table from list, all of this. Actually, it was easier to do it like that. So the function is then this table from list, and my list is not custom 1 anymore. It's the code I have in custom 1, which is this. So it looks a bit messy, I think, when you do it like this, but this is to avoid having multiple steps, because I really like having few steps. And to make the Cartesian product, which is just this table multiplied by this table, I first want to grab the distinct IDs, because that's what I'm going to act upon. So distinct IDs, well, actually it doesn't really matter which order I do, but I want to add a column to this, and then the column I add is then the step list hashtag quotation marks. So for each row inside my ID table, I'm adding the entire list of 01 to 09. And when I then expand that, I get the Cartesian product. But again, I don't want to have a step here where I just call a previous step. So I can do it like this. And then it's mad because it's not custom one. It would be distinct IDs. Again, I can just expand this with the button and say I don't want the original column as prefix. And then I have this. And I need to make sure, because I want to do a join on the step up here in the source, which is where I actually get my teams from. That means I need to make sure that my types are the same, so I can check promoted headers. That's text, text, and text. So I need this to also be text. And then just for good measure, I'll force the first column to also be text. And then I can simply do a merge, and I need both columns to do a specific merge. So ID and column 1, I get that by holding down Control. And of course I'll need to then update what the table I'm acting on, and I'm using left outer because I need all the rows here, even though not all rows of the right table will return a value, because it needs to be the promoted headers. So not change type, but promoted headers, and then it's possible that the columns aren't called that. Yep, they aren't. It's called ID and year month. So ID and year month, and I should probably have changed that, but that's fine. So 2023-01 is A, and this returns nothing because there is no A 2023-02 value, and that's because that's what I'll be adding. From that point, I just want to sort an ID, and this, no, not ascending, ascending, and yeah, so I have A first and then 01 to 9, which I need when I expand my table, which is exactly what I'm going to do. And I just need the team, and again I'll have nulls, but because I already have a value at the beginning at 2023-01, that means when I go to the next person, I will have a value on the first row, and that's something I'll need for the next query. And because when I go to a new person, I always have a value, I can simply fill down. And now I have my final product. So that was the simple version. In the more complicated version, I have people who didn't do what I asked them to do, which was to have a row that started at the current year, first month, that said, hey, what team was this person on at the start of the year? I have no team information on person A before May, and likewise for person C, I have no information before July. But person B was nice enough to do what I asked, and person D was not nice enough, and they even had a change. But other than that, all the steps are the same, so I'll just skip to that. And the problem here is that I can't just do fill down, because again, the first row for person A is null. So if I fill that down, I'll get null. And because I don't have any information for person C, if I try to fill down for person B, then the team of person B would be copied for person C, which I don't want. So I need actually to get a lot of information to do this. It seemed simple, and this is something that would be easy to do manually, because you can literally just check, hey, person B and C aren't the same, so just don't copy from B down to C. But to make a computer do it is a bit more of a task. And I need to grab information on the previous row, so I'll add a new column, which is an index column. And because Power Query rows start at index 0, I can refer to the current row by having my index column start at 0, but I don't want to refer to the current row, I want to refer to the previous row. So I'll have this at -1. And I have a bunch of conditions that I need to take into account. And the first is that when I'm in the first row, there's no way to get information on the previous row because I'm in the first row. So that would be my first information, which means this is going to be my first condition, to check if the index value, if that's equal to -1, then I'm in the first row and I want to grab the information from team, and that can be null as in this case, or it could be a value. And if that isn't the case, then I want to say if the team in the current row, if that is not null, like it is here, then I want to grab, if that's not equal to null, then I want to grab the value, which means that for this row and this row and this row, it will copy the value into the new column. And otherwise, and this is where it starts getting a bit trippy, I have to say if the ID of the current row, so for this row 11, if the ID is equal to the ID of the previous row, and that was called added index, the previous table, I should say. If the value in the current row's ID is equal to the value of the previous steps' ID, and then the row is the current row's value in the index column. And because I start at -1, I don't have to say -1 here. So I can simply say if the current row's ID column is equal to the previous row's ID column, then I want to grab that value, so from the previous row. And then I can just copy this part and change the ID to team. And I've already checked, and that's why the order matters here, that I first check if the current row's team is not null, because this will then only execute if the value is null. But this doesn't help me for the next row, because in this row, when I go in and check, well, the team is null, so I should execute the third line, but the previous rows is also null, which means that this new value for this row will be null, but that's something I'll handle. And then I want to say if this condition isn't met, which means that first of all, I'm not in the first row, and the team value is not null, and the ID is different, so C and B aren't the same. Then I want to say that it should be the text new person. So because there's no team in the first row, this will be equal to null, and then the next values will also be null because the current row's value is null and the previous row is null. But here I have a team, and because the next row has the same ID, then it grabs the value. And likewise here, it has the same person, so it grabs the previous row's value. But here, B and C are not equal to one another, so the row doesn't grab the value from the previous row, and instead it writes new person. So this effectively means that now I can copy down safely, because there's a border here. So when I copy down, only these 3 rows will be filled. And this is a separator sort of, and this is also separator. So I can copy A down, but then when I get to new person, I don't override person C with person B's value. And the same way, I can then copy new person down, which I will then replace afterwards. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So fill down. And then I of course need to get rid of this new person, which is just a placeholder to say, hey, I don't actually have any information on this person, which is then exactly what I'm going to do to say, hey, I don't have information on new person, so I want to replace that with null. And now I'm back. So at this point I have an option. I can either say this is the result I have. I only have information for the rows here where I have the new team, but you'll have to decide if you want to know that I don't have information on these rows, because you could then go back to the person or the team and say, hey, I need you to take a hold of person C and tell me what team was that person on in 2023-01, and the same for person D, and the same for person A, that I need this information. Or alternatively, and I wouldn't recommend this, you could simply remove the nulls, but then you have sort of incomplete data. That means if you're making a data model and you have information for the whole year, then you can't say anything about person A before May. So I wouldn't use this where you just filter out all the nulls, because I would consider this an error that needs to be fixed by simply getting a hold of the contact person and saying, hey, you need to talk to these people. Which means you could actually do the opposite and do something like say, hey, you could count rows and say if there are any rows in this table, then you need to get a hold of them. Yeah, my notes tell me that I showed this in video 41, the alternative way to deal with bad dates, where I would then say, hey, if you filter it on nulls and then you count rows, then you could have a step here saying that if there are any rows in this table, then you need to print that table. So you can say, hey, I need to get a hold of these people because they need to tell me that I need information from this day and from this day and from this day. But that's really up to you if you want to do that. So I would do that because then you also know which people need information and what information you need. But that is everything I had to show. Yep.